Well, I do want to honor everyone's time tonight and offer just a word of gratitude for everybody taking this time on a Tuesday evening to join us for a Trinity Conference webinar on a very important topic, on the topic of insurance. I do want to open us with a word of prayer before I offer some introductions and create space for conversation. Let's bow together for a word of prayer. Gracious and loving God, what a gift it is to have the opportunity to gather together this evening and to consider what it means to be faithful stewards of the resources you've entrusted to us. So, Lord, we ask that you would bless our conversation and that you would grant us your wisdom and your presence. We thank you for the power of your Holy Spirit that is in work in and amongst us. And so we ask now that you would guide us as faithful trustees of your church, Lord. Thank you for the pastors and lay leaders that have gathered. We ask that you would equip them with every gift necessary to serve you faithfully. We love you, Lord. And we thank you for these leaders, these insurance agents that come before us tonight to share their wisdom. We ask that you would bless their input and help them to help us as we work together to seek you first. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 So I do see a note that Jared Underwood is with us, and I am making him a panelist on David's behalf.
Good deal.
There we go. Jared was with us when we met last. So first I want to just frame up. Hey, Jared.
You muted, Jared.
There we go. How are you
There
guys? Yep.
Great.
Hey, Jared.
So hey guys, I just want to frame up kind of where this all started from. We had our very first laity session at the Trinity Annual Conference in the summer in Shreveport, Louisiana, and while we were there, we took some feedback, had some questions, and Oscar and Sarah and Carl were there with me and Jim on stage. And one of the things we heard from you from the laity was, how can we address the issues around insurance? The matters are getting more and more complex. The rates are continuing to increase. We have churches that were being dropped, companies that weren't serving it any longer, so on and so forth. It was just a whole multitude of issues that were being lifted up. And as we heard that, I just felt compelled that we needed to seek a faithful response. What is a faithful response in the midst of that climate that was described to us? Now we're in an interesting situation. And now in the Global Methodist Church, there is no trust clause. The denomination doesn't hold trust over the local church's property. And so we don't have any requirements we're able to levy with regard to insurance. And so we don't have the ability to say, hey, trustees committee, in your report, we don't see that you have insurance. And so for us to come in and say you need to do X, Y, and Z, have these minimum standards, that's not our capacity any longer. However, trustee committees do have accountability. It's accountability to the Lord for the faithful stewardship of what has been entrusted to them. And they have accountability to the other members of the church. How are we caring for those resources for the benefit of the whole of the membership of the church and the whole of the mission field that God has deployed us into? And so even though we don't have a trust clause and we don't have those minimum standard requirements, we do believe that insurance is a critical matter in our local churches. And as an equipping body, the conference equipping the local church for ministry and for multiplication of disciples, we thought that we needed to respond. I was really thankful that at that laity session, Robert Kent was in attendance, and Robert came up to me afterwards. I knew Robert previously, didn't have a deep familiarity with his professional life, but knew him through my friend, his wife, Susan Kent, who's a pastor in our conference. And Robert raised his hand and said, "I'm willing to help. I'm willing to help guide us as a conference into an equipping function." And so I'm really thankful for that. We've met. I've invited him to help recruiting others that can be be thought partners in this and be engaged with us as a conference. And so I do want to give opportunity for them to introduce themselves. But before we do that, I do want to just share with you, if you as an attendee have a question that you would like us to answer, we do have a decent number of questions and content that we think will be very beneficial for all of you to receive. But we also know that there are questions that you have that you would really have a burning desire to have answered. If you could put them in the Q&A, I will be monitoring the Q&A while I'm also moderating this conversation. And as those come up, I'll be looking to see when would be the right time to platform that question. Now, just a note, I would love if you could do your very best, attendees, to generalize those questions. I know that every church's specific concern has a narrow focus, but if you could generalize that to have as great and as broad a benefit for our conference as possible, that would be hugely helpful. In the end, there are going to be opportunities for you to utilize these three gentlemen, their companies, as a resource, a sounding board to engage with for very specific and narrow matters. However, if you are able in this conversation to lift up a general question, you could do that in the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring that. So, gentlemen, go ahead and introduce yourself, a little bit about who you are, a little bit about your company. Robert, since I already mentioned how you raised your hand, maybe you could go first.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I'm Robert Kent. I own a insurance agency in Texas called Kent Family Insurance. As Jason mentioned, I'm a clergy spouse. My wife Susan is a church planter. She's planted a second campus for First Methodist in Conroe, Texas, a new church called the Woodlands Hills Community Church. And so, when I'm not talking insurance, I'm talking Jesus and trying to recruit people to come to the new church.
Absolutely. And he sits on the front row, but he's a giant of a man, which does make it hard to see the screens at times. Just
I
saying.
have been known to block out 4 or 5 rows of seats behind me. Yes, absolutely. I call myself the tallest preacher's wife in the whole state, but I think Wendy down in was it Richmond Rosenberg area. I think her
Yeah,
husband. I think
Rosenberg.
he outgrows me a little bit. So
Yeah, as a tall man too. Well, Beau, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Beaux Pilgrim. I'm in Louisiana. I've been in the insurance business for about 31 years, as an agency owner for about 16 years. And insurance is what I do. We write a lot of churches here in Louisiana, and yeah, it certainly has been quite a difficult season for our churches, especially for all insureds, but especially for churches. And, glad to be here and offer any assistance or knowledge that I can.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Beau. And Jared.
Mhm.
Yeah, my name is Jared Underwood with Ozark Hills Insurance. We have an office in Mountain Home, Arkansas, and we've been in business for, combined agencies, 30, 40 plus years. I'll kind of echo what Beau said, is it's been a challenge with churches. We have a lot of markets for them, but it's something that is here to face us now and probably not going to lessen up anytime soon. So
Appreciate that. Well, as you could see, you might have caught on, attendees, that when Robert and I first met, I said, hey, it would be highly beneficial if we could have an agent that is in Texas. That's you, Robert. One that's in Louisiana, and he found Beau, and one that's in Arkansas. And so Jared and the owner of Ozark Hills Insurance, David Hall, agreed to step in and be a part of this conversation. So really glad to have one from each state, as there are some nuanced differences in the marketplaces that we want to be mindful of as we make presentation all across the Trinity Conference. Also, one of the things I was really intrigued by from Robert in our conversation was that Robert is a Dave Ramsey trusted professional, and in that qualification, whenever he was looking for other agents, one from Louisiana, one for Arkansas, we just went to that well and said, well, how about we have a Dave Ramsey trusted professional from all 3 states to engage in this conversation? So maybe one of you could just share what does it mean to be a Dave Ramsey trusted professional? What are those qualifications so that we know a little bit about who we're talking to and their capacity and qualifications in that?
Sure. Who wants to take that one?
I can take that. So
Go
as
for it.
as Jason mentioned, we're all trusted pros with Dave Ramsey, all in the property and casualty world. So that spans both home and auto insurance as well over in the commercial space, where churches are going to fall. We're three of the about 375 total pros from across the country. And I did a little research. I wanted to kind of bring some context into what that means. So 375 out of over 600,000 insurance agents, property and casualty insurance agents across the country. So it's a very, very, very select group. We go through a vetting process. We have multiple interviews and with a variety of folks, part of the Dave Ramsey platform and his whole system. After we're kind of given the opportunity, and we have a bunch of training we have to go through, and there's testing to go along and make sure that we're learning kind of in accordance with some of Dave's teachings. We take kind of a condensed version of the Financial Peace University as part of that training, and then we have to participate in monthly mastermind calls. So we're always staying up with other professionals around the country. I know my mastermind group, we got folks up in the Pacific Northwest, up in the New York area, just really all over the country. So it gives us a lot of good perspective. And another little couple nuggets, which I was kind of surprised, but then not. As I mentioned, financial peace. There's about 300,000 FPU participants every year. So that's a huge number of folks across the country, and certainly in our churches that are learning financial responsibility and so forth. And then beyond that, the weekly social media and the podcasts and the radio programs and so forth, they estimate over 15 million followers on a weekly basis. So it's a little small system, haha.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's incredible to know that that to be a trusted pro with Dave Ramsey, it's only 375 out of 600K. I mean, that's a exclusive group, and we're really really thankful for that continued investment in expertise and culture and training. So thank you for being present with us. I had just a quick question and just kind of to level set. All 3 of you, my understanding is you're insurance agents, not insurance companies. Beaux, maybe you could share with us the difference, just to be sure we're all on the same playing field, the difference between an insurance company and an insurance agent, and how an insurance agent intersects with or interfaces with an insurance company.
Sure, glad to do that. I'll start with the insurance company. So the insurance company is actually the carrier the entity that actually writes the insurance. They're responsible for collecting the money, paying out the claims. Guide One is an example of an insurance company. The Hartford, Progressive, those are all different insurance companies. Where we come into play is we're kind of in between them and the consumer, where each one of us, Robert and myself and Jared, we all represent a lot of insurance companies that we sell for. And our job is, as a risk manager, as an agent, is we talk to whoever the client is, evaluate their needs, and then connect them with the right insurance product that is from an insurance company. That's really the primary differences. We're kind of the go-to, we're the face to that insurance company, but multiple insurance companies, really.
Perfect. It's really helpful. But now to the $1,000,000 question. What in the world has happened in the last 2 years in insurance? I mean, golly, people are getting like disconnect notices. That's what I know that there's a better term for it, but people like getting notices like, hey, you're out, we're cutting you off. And then there are churches that are getting, 50, 60% increases year over year to insurance. What is happening in this marketplace? How can we as folks outside of the industry come to know and understand why? What is taking place in the industry that is causing this volatility?
I'll jump in with that. One of the things that we've seen in Texas is the traditional sources of church insurance. I'm not going to necessarily name any names, but the largest two or three companies were typically the low cost providers, and I know many of the churches throughout the conference probably had relationships with one or more of these companies, and what they found is that they were taking on too much risk, and really that came to light with um, the Uri, the freeze, snowstorm, whatever we want to call it. I call it Snowmageddon. Some of the tropical issues, wind and hail events, things like that. The claims payouts started getting astronomical, and so much higher than what they were bringing in as a premium. And so a lot of these carriers just said, you know what, we can't handle this risk anymore. It's too much. And then coupled that with a lot of the inflationary pressures that have hit the marketplace. So it's kind of this perfect storm of all these different conditions that are dumping on top of these insurance carriers. And what ended up happening is several of the major carriers started getting credit downgrades, and which caused their cost of borrowing to skyrocket. So here they've got to pay out more, and they can't get capital or can't get cash fast enough or in the quantities that they need. So they just started saying we need to get away from some of these risks, and that's where we've seen if a church maybe had one is as little as one. I've seen that situation. One claim in the last 3 years, they were non-renewed, and that's that disconnect notice that you were talking about, Jason.
And to speak
Yeah,
from,
it's excellent. Go ahead, Jared.
And to speak from, kind of put this in some terms that I feel like normal people don't hear. We attended some meetings. Oh, this has been back in June, and this number kind of stuck with me. But as of May 30th, there had been 842 tornadoes touched down across the U.S. So when you sit and think about that, that's also driving a lot of these prices. Like you talked about, the price of property's gotten so high and they can't keep up with the claims. But I don't think the average person realizes, I didn't, and I've been in insurance for quite a few years, and I didn't realize that many tornadoes had touched down across the U.S. So when you put that kind of numbers out there and you think that affects a lot of people, that's where these claims are coming from, a lot of them, and driving the prices.
Oh yeah, both excellent points. We saw over really probably like the last 5 to 6 years, coastal states, we saw a lot of hurricane activity, more severe than typical. The last 2 years have been a lot quieter, but the previous 4 were pretty devastating years. And that coupled with like the ice storm that Robert's mentioned, and also there has been a lot more tornadic activity through the northern part of our state, Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma, that have all contributed to this. And that on top of the crazy amounts of inflation is just, insurance companies just couldn't get in front of it. And so, they were doing a couple of different things. One of them is cutting rate, but also the other was just cutting coverage and then cutting clients, trying to just stay alive, so to speak. So they didn't go, financially insolvent, because a lot of them were just really struggling during the last couple of years.
So basically what you're saying is, as the claims increased, the payouts increased, the solvency of the insurance companies decreased, and the vulnerability needed to be mitigated. And ultimately it came in the mitigation of either reducing risk by reducing client base, or reducing or increasing revenue, which comes at an increased premium from the churches.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like, you almost gonna look at it like in a personal budget. Your own personal budget, you only make so much money during the year, probably. If you work by hourly, or you have opportunities for overtime, well, maybe you can work more, but you can only work so much more. And if for some reason all of a sudden you've got some massive increase in expenses, maybe medical expenses or something like that were not anticipated, right? But there's only so many things you can do. You can only work so much more, or in this case with the insurance companies, only sell so much more or only charge so much more. But you got to look for other things too, right? In your personal budget, you have to look for massive ways to maybe cut expenses. And, that's kind of a parody to what the insurance companies have been just trying to figure out. And, areas where they just can't figure it out anymore, figure out how to make money, they've had to just pull out of regions or even pull out of states. I know we've lost a couple of carriers completely in Louisiana.
Yeah, let's stay there for a minute, because I think that's one of the things that a lot of our churches have seen, is that they're with a carrier, or were with the carrier that now says we're not covering anybody in your zip code or your region or your state any longer. And then they go to start looking for other brokers, and they get no, 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 one after another, until they start, the church, the people that are attending right now, they might start feeling hopeless of, is anybody able to cover us? So what how prevalent in each of your three contexts is that kind of disconnect notice, that no more coverage in a context, not because of my claims history as a church, but because of my location as a church, or because of my age as a building? How common is that? How significant of an issue is it? And are there places that just have no coverage available? And if so, where are those places? What does that look like?
I know from Texas standpoint, yes, we've had a few carriers pull out. Not so many that operate in the church insurance space. Thank goodness, knock on wood. But they're certainly not taking new business. So to switch from one of the, say a church mutual to a brotherhood mutual to a guide one, any of those combinations, those options may not be as prevalent as what they once were. But the beautiful thing about working with an agent, similar to kind of what Beau was describing earlier, where we have flexibility, we have multiple options. That's been a great arrow in my quiver, at least helping churches here in Texas. There are other options, and we may have to kind of tailor a package specifically for the needs to make sure that the price point is right. But we're still able to do that. And it's all going to be dependent on kind of the part of the state, the area of the state. At one point, there were large swaths of geography that a carrier would say, okay, we're gonna tackle Southeast Texas. Well, just with technology and everything else, now they're narrowing it down to zip codes, or counties, and then even zip codes, where one zip code next to another. One may have some options with the carriers, and the one next to it may not. So having flexibility and options is kind of the key message there. Is being able to go to the same carrier for 40 years, that's just not so much an option anymore.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, with what Robert's saying, a lot of it depends on where you're at in the state. There's still options everywhere, but depending on how far down you go in the state of Louisiana, the options do get more and more minimal. You get extremely coastal, or also depending on claims history, your options are going to be limited to probably to property coverage with the Louisiana Citizens Plan, and it really becomes more of not necessarily just is there an option or not, is the option that you have cost prohibitive or not, because the rates have increased significantly. Astronomically would probably be a better word for that in some areas, but it certainly has increased a great deal. And so there are options. There's probably, in the last couple of months, I have seen a couple more options come out, but not a lot. I really expect it to be, sometime this next coming year, maybe we'll see a little bit more loosening it up.
What about in Arkansas, Jared?
In Arkansas, we've not had any just real companies pull out of Arkansas by any means. We have had them kind of tighten their belt a little bit on what they're willing to take, age of building, age of roof, that kind of stuff. But as far as completely pulling out, we've not seen that. We have markets in Arkansas, strong markets, what I consider direct carriers. So right now we're okay. Like Robert said, there's been other companies pull out of other, classes of business, but right now we've not seen that in Arkansas just yet.
Yes. Yeah. So one option is that maybe you can put your church on a back of a truck and move it up to Arkansas.
And all of your members.
Well, and
Right.
it's one thing we don't get the wind, like you said, the coastal risk you guys incur sometimes. We get some high winds, and ours is the tornadoes. We
Yeah, well, I think some of the people would be for moving to Arkansas if they could just pick a spot on one of those lakes that they have up in the foothills of the Ozarks. I
Oh
just
yeah, some beautiful places. Yeah.
Yeah, Chris Akers, I see your hand. I sent you a message in the chat at the beginning of the meeting. I asked if you have a question, if you could just click the Q&A button and ask the question. I'm going to be collecting those questions there, and incorporating them into our conversation. So for any of you attendees, feel free to ask a question in the Q&A. You could click the button at the bottom of your Zoom, and you could ask that question, and I'll do my best to incorporate it in the conversation. So, other than moving to an Arkansas lakefront property, I am looking for some glimmer of hope. Beau, you just mentioned you're hopeful that maybe some companies will have some loosening. Are y'all seeing any signs of this? Are there any
Yeah, a
companies
little
that are
bit.
moving back in?
Yeah, well, I'm seeing a little bit of loosening up. It's not a lot in commercial, but I'm seeing a little bit more in the personal lines, and so the commercial will probably follow suit. It started getting more difficult for the commercial lines after personal lines in Louisiana for us, so I'm just assuming it's going to follow suit. But I have had a couple of different carriers that told me they're open up for churches again, but these are still not the preferred writers still. But but that's still a good sign that there's some appetite. So the others should eventually follow suit. And then typically also when you see more carriers say we're interested, that also means that they're typically more interested in maybe a little bit lower cost also for the insurance. So I'm optimistic, and there are other things. I don't know. I know we talked about the pre-meeting before some other options that you can kind of look at to try to make yourself more insurable. Whenever you want to talk about that, we can kind of shift there too.
Yeah, we'll get there in just a second. Well, what kind of challenges, whenever you have a church client come to you and you begin the process of interfacing with the insurance companies and looking at those options, what are the challenges that you find in that process? That it would be easy if we could all hear them, like name them. Jared alluded to like age of roof or age of building, but just help us out here. What vulnerabilities create challenges whenever a church comes to you and is seeking help finding an insurance company and policy?
One of the big things that I see is I kind of ask questions. We talk through the scenario is not having kind of a simple source of information. So a lot of the churches that we have throughout the conference, there's going to be maybe a main church building, there might be a fellowship hall building, an education building, a parsonage. So you've got multiple structures. Each of them were built at a different time. Each of them have a different. The roof may have been updated at a different time. The electrical, the air conditioning system, the plumbing may have all been updated at a certain time. So if there's one suggestion that can help the process is to create a spreadsheet or some kind of information page where you can just pass on from one trustee group to the next and just kind of have a central record to keep all that information together rather than having to go search for it every time you're having a conversation or every time you have an update of one of those systems.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then also, the other is I know you mentioned the roofs. Others are just basic updates, such as like plumbing updates or any sort of electrical updates. Make sure your breaker boxes doesn't look like like a nightmare. That there's not just open sockets where breaker should be, or there's not extension cords like on the ground or whatever. Of course, also just your grounds in general. And make sure that grounds look nice, that you got a pride of ownership, because the appearance really helps set the tone whenever the insurance company goes out to take a look at it, or the agent goes to take a look at it. It sets the tone for how well do they take care of their property, right? And things like sidewalks with maybe holes, or parking lots with holes in it, or just the paint is maybe not maybe peeling or flaky, or maybe there's mildew on the side, and different things like that are some of the different things that certainly would help, because insurance companies are looking a lot harder right now than they did a few years ago, to make sure they're not about to pick up a bad risk, so to speak. So they're looking a little bit harder than maybe they would have a few years ago. But just some of those basic maintenance updates, that's obviously we go into a lot more detail on a lot of that sort of stuff, but I don't want to bore everybody with an hour-long conversation about that.
Jared, anything to add on that?
No, they kind of hit on a lot of it. One thing up here that I'm sure I don't know if you guys deal with it down there, but a lot of our companies talking about Bo was talking about how kind of they're really getting there kind of with a microscope looking at things, but steeples on churches is one that they're saying. I mean, that's one. If it has a steeple,
Yeah.
it's automatic no. So it's things like, and what that's just them using anything to get off of this is what I see that as. What church doesn't? A lot of churches have steeples. So, like you said, things that they didn't care too much about 5, 10 years ago, it's something they're really just nitpicking to find reasons to.
So Robert, we went straight into the existing church marketplace, and this is near and dear to your heart as you're working towards construction of the Woodland Hills campus of First Methodist Conroe. And so we did have a question come across: what should new church construction be considering whenever they are under development, when taking insurability into account? And by the way, I happen to know the person that lifted up the question, and they are north of the I-10 corridor, but still in South Louisiana, the Delta. Let's put it that way, in the Delta. So maybe Bo should answer that question, but we'll start with Robert on new construction and then see if Bo has anything to add from the Delta.
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, it does hit near and dear to my heart. Susan and I have had conversations in the evenings in our spare time about that, just as they're going through the design phase and so forth.
So no leaving work at home. You just brought the work.
Well,
Robert Kent, I'm pretty sure
home.
not.
Yeah.
Robert Kent works all the time.
Whether or not I'm interacting with one of my agency clients or with Susan, just stuff, the conversation kind of shifts. I mean, because obviously you don't have to worry about roof age, you don't have to worry about updates to your electrical system and things like that. Now you've got to look at, okay, let's look at security. Let's look at what's the children's playground, what kind of safety protocols do you have around that. It develops more of a risk mitigation plan for what the church needs to do, or I guess the building. What do you need to have in place? What are some of the things that the trustees, the steering committee that she's working with, what are some of the things they need to do? Have conversations with the architect and the planners for that. So it's making sure other aspects of it are in place, more from a liability standpoint than a pure property standpoint.
It's really helpful.
Yeah.
Good.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Bo.
I was gonna say, yeah, I agree completely with what Robert Kent is saying, and then also, if you're talking about a newer construction, if you got the options, go with a non-combustible material is definitely going to be better. The insurance companies there's definitely more options for newer construction, but if you can go with a non-combustible option, you're going to be better off. If you can afford to put the sprinkler system, put the sprinkler system in. Also, fire and other security systems like what Robert was mentioning. Definitely put in those, and just be also thoughtful of the ground. How are you going to set them up? Children's playground area. The different types of entrances you have, and how the property is going to be. Is it going to be easy for you to maintain and keep it looking pristine, so that people see that you have pride of ownership? Because again, remember, as they come out and look, they're still going to be considering what is the appearance of the property. Is it maintained? Is it well kept? But then also, again, back to those materials. Um, non-combustible materials. Same thing with the roofing, if you can, or if you go with shingle roofing, architectural shingle versus the other. Also, look into fortified in the state of Louisiana is also something you need to look into. That's a higher grade of construction in Louisiana that a lot of times you can get discounted rates for, and also just it increases significantly the wind durability of your property.
And one thing you guys had mentioned about Robert did about or Bo did about sprinklers. That's one thing in Arkansas on new frame, if they're using wood framing, they're wanting sprinkler systems put in on them. And then secondly, your water shut off valves for potential water leaks. That's another big one they're pushing right now.
Yeah, if you think your insurance is high, price installing a sprinkler system, right?
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, that's one of those things that it's expensive, but they're trying to push that on a lot of customers.
If you're building new, put in a sprinkler system while it's new construction, because it's a lot more to retrofit it later.
Yes, absolutely. Have it part of that capital campaign.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm going to shift gears and then come back, because we've gotten a few questions around something we haven't touched on at all. Personal liability, injury protection coverage, just kind of that general liability. We even had one person ask, and I think because I've talked with you enough, I think I could answer this one, which is scary. So hopefully,
You want to take a stab at it?
No, I'm not. I'm gonna trust y'all, and then I'm gonna give myself a fist pump if I answer correctly. They
Hey,
said,
Jason, we happen to know how you can get a property and casualty insurance license.
Another job, just to toss it
just
on.
in your spare time. I mean,
spare time. Yeah, I remember that. So just want to turn the corner to just property insurance. Then someone asked, what kind of increase should we expect in liability insurance, general liability, directors and officers, and cybersecurity insurance? So that was it was a really specific question, but they didn't get narrowed to their local context. So I'd love for you to take a stab at it, and I'll see if I could have answered it. And really just do want to hear, like, is there a difference in the things we've been talking about increases, about coverages, those sorts of things, when it shifts from property to the general liability? And I'll say a little bit more about that here in a second, but question.
Sure. I could
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I could start a little bit. We've not seen nearly the increase in the liability, the sexual misconduct, just the general liability, the directors and officers, those different coverages. We haven't seen a significant. It's been a little bit more of just becoming more difficult to acquire because of the carriers that Robert alluded to earlier. Typically, they were all kind of part of the package that you could buy. There was a premium charge for it, and usually there was more stringent just policy and procedures the church had to set up so they could get the coverage, and then there was usually a small expense for that. Well, those same policy and procedures that you had to have placed are still there, but you've had to go out to different lines, basically like monoline, where you just go to a certain carrier to pick up those coverages, and sometimes that has become a little bit more cost prohibitive. Where it may have cost you, depending on the side of your church, maybe a few $100s to a few $1,000. It's probably closer to, a few $1,000s to maybe $10,000 for all those coverages combined, depending on the size of your church. But it's even though it's significant, I guess it's in perspective of how small it was to begin with versus property coverages has been, a lot more of an increase for us.
That's the same for Arkansas. We're not the property is driving the price up. The GL, the directors and officers, professional liability, those typically have not seen much of an increase, if any, so far that we've come across. It's typically the property increase, which really hitting home for the churches.
Yeah, I agree. We're seeing the same thing in Texas. The predominant is the property insurance. That being said, I know of multiple churches, at least here in the Houston area, that have had cyber issues over the last several years. So the importance of cyber liability is becoming more and more prevalent. Those claims can be fairly costly if you just try to manage it yourself. And that's one of the beautiful things about the cyber carriers is they will literally take over for you. So you file the claim, yeah, you're kind of working, getting updates and so forth, but the hassle of a cyber liability claim, I mean, it could shut the church down from an operation standpoint for 3, 6, 8 months easily. If you don't have the right team assembled, and that's what the cyber carriers will do for you. They'll assemble that team.
So in the same vein, we did have a question about child protection and safety team protocols,
Mm-hmm.
and if there are elements of those that you would recommend or give caution to with regard to insurability. They want to make sure that their child protection and safety team protocols help them be more insurable, not less insurable. So any insights there?
Yeah, I know
The key to it is having written policy and procedure.
Right.
And
background
I
checks.
actually have background checks. If anybody's driving vehicles, having the MVR reports pulled, safe sanctuary training. It's kind of an old term, but that's part of the policies and procedures, and have that documented. Have a binder or whatever. Maybe it's all electronic, but have some documentation trail that all these people are volunteers, through the church, or they're staff members, and they have been background checked. They've been through the safe sanctuary training. Those type things.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, excellent points. The proper training. You don't. It's always two adults, present, and the buddy system sort of thing. Background checks. Know the people that you have in your church that you're trusting with the kids there. Really, really know them well. It's there's a lot of, I don't know, the devil really likes to play in that playground, right? And we just got to take every precaution to protect those. And but those are a lot of different things the insurance companies are going to be looking for. Is how long are these people with your church before you allow them to supervise children? Have you done background checks for them? Do you have a written policy and procedures process in place, and are you educating them? And then sometimes it's even, are you just educating them when they first start, or are you educating them every year? It's better to educate them every year and do like updates.
Absolutely. So I do want to add for all of those that are watching and listening, the Global Methodist Church has a partnership with Ministry Safe, and we actually have access to the background check system through Ministry Safe at a discounted rate. So I would hope that all of you would take advantage of that. There are sample policies on Ministry Safe that could become the foundation for what you develop in your church. Furthermore, they have trainings that will be available on Ministry Safe website that you could utilize to train all of your volunteers. And they have all of those things at a discounted rate through our work with the Global Methodist Church. If you don't know how to access our Ministry Safe account as a denomination, please reach out to our conference office. Sarah Carter at scarter@trinitygmc.org is our liaison with our Ministry Safe profile, and she would be glad to help you and your church in the Trinity Conference get access to Ministry Safe to make sure you get a policy written, access to background checks, and training materials available for you. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I would encourage
Jason,
everybody to just really, take advantage of like programs like that. It's a very complicated program that you got to get set up, and a lot of us just aren't. We don't do that for every day. We don't do that as a living. Here's an organization that's all they do is provide you with a policy and procedures process to make sure that you keep your church safe. So definitely, definitely take advantage of that.
And don't just write the policy and then file it in a drawer.
Yeah,
Execute the
follow it.
policy that you write.
Yes.
Execute the
Yes.
policy that you write. Okay.
Yeah.
Critical because it's all
Jason, also, I'll add one of the carriers that we have in our arsenal. They have a wealth of documents and guides and tips and sample policies and procedures, things like that, that approach it not so much from the kind of the risk prevention standpoint, but what are the insurance carriers looking at? So maybe a combination of the two might be the best path forward for a church if they're trying to implement that.
great. Wonderful. Wonderful. Man, we have a lot of folks that are asking great questions, and I didn't anticipate this one, but here it is. What impact does stained glass have on insurability and insurance? Particularly, the question was about 100-year-old stained glass. And because we have churches in the 200-year-old anniversary range, maybe I should ask 200-year-old stained glass. So help us out with regard to our more seasoned congregations and their beautiful, beautiful facilities.
I actually just worked with a synagogue recently that had a stained glass in their I guess their sanctuary, they're calling it as well. And a lot of the carriers are viewing that as fine art. So they'll schedule that or kind of create it on the side and have a separate coverage limit for that stained glass. Obviously, some of the things going on with the Jewish congregations around the country, going back to the October 7th issues from last year in Israel. A lot of the congregations here in the States are having to upgrade security. This particular congregation, they installed bulletproof glass on the outside of that stained glass, just to make sure it was going to be protected in case somebody decided to try to shoot at the building.
Yeah, I know. We're saying in Louisiana that in some cases it's very difficult to get coverage for it. It's very expensive because they treat it like fine art. I mean, because it really is. It is extreme.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. There's just not a lot of people that can do it. Sometimes, unfortunately, like the lid, that's in it, may get brittle, and sometimes they have problems with it. But yeah, it's a lot more difficult to get the coverage for it. They will typically schedule it as fine art, and the rate is going to be much more expensive for it. And some churches are just opting to not cover that and just cover the building minus that stained glass, so to speak.
So it ends up becoming, because it's separately scheduled or can be separately scheduled, it becomes a conversation for the local church's trustees on the affordability of the rates, and it could be a carve out, and you might say that, hey, we're going to do our best to preserve it in other ways like security cameras or bulletproof glass or those sorts of things, and then write it out of the policy if it becomes an affordability issue. That's helpful to know that it's oftentimes separately scheduled. Had some questions about playgrounds. It sounds to me like people are actually considering whether or not to construct a playground. I don't have the background on this story, and I'm glad it's left general, but What difference does having a playground have on insurance coverage? And does it depend on, are there any factors about the playground that need to be considered, like fencing or signage and at your own risk information? And tell us how to make a playground as affordable as possible with regard to insurance.
All those things.
Yeah.
Signage. It's got to be behind a fence and a self-locking gate, and you have to have supervisors, and make sure that you're constantly inspecting it to make sure that all the equipment is safe, and whatever the material you have on the ground is helps soften the fall. All those different things. The is the best thing you can do though is to not have one.
Ah, boo.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry,
Beaux Pilgrim doesn't like children. That's what I just, breaking news on this webinar. Oh man. Oh, it does have an impact, is what you're saying. That we need.
definitely.
Yeah, it does, and a lot of it is the liability side of it, of the equation, and thank goodness rates associated with liability are not as extreme as what we're seeing on the property side. So, I think Bo will agree that even with the children's playground, you're not going to be breaking the bank with the premium, like you would with on the building side. But certainly having those policies, procedures, have everything documented, having the volunteers, the Sunday school teachers, VBS teachers, whoever it might be, Mother's Day out programs, what is that all, who's all involved, and keeping tight records of those folks and have them trained, and getting back to the safe sanctuary stuff. So there are ways around, and ways that we could help a church mitigate that risk exposure.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
You do your best. You put the sign up, you put the fence up, and you give it as soft of a landing as possible, and you try to not have the metal merry-go-round that we had when we were growing up. That's the reason for my empty patch in my beard, because I have 7 stitches right here from hitting that edge. So less of that. So
Jason, we must have been on the same merry-go-round, because I got the same thing.
Those are metal. They were fun though, weren't they?
Yeah, why was I the last one to jump on? I mean, really, like it just anyway.
But I mean, I agree completely with Robert saying, it's not going to affect the rate hugely. Do the fence, keep up the property, make the landing soft, make sure you have the policy and procedures. Number one is that policy and procedures in place that safeguard your children, but also are in place for keeping up your property, and that's part of your property.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to bring us back. I really appreciate one of the questions. Really share with us. Hey, many of us are volunteers with minimal time, and we have this responsibility, and we want to honor God in it. And so we're gonna ask y'all to do your best on this. Going back, I think earlier, Robert, you were the one that helped us with this. The items that should be tracked on our properties and facilities. Could you list those out again? And so that we can start that work. So could you provide that list again of the critical items that should be on the list that we should track?
Yeah, absolutely. I would list literally each building, what year it was constructed, when the last time the roof was updated, when the electrical system was updated. Certainly have routine inspections, and maybe list those inspection dates. Same thing for plumbing. What type of plumbing it is. Is it more cast iron plumbing? Is it MPT fittings? Is it more PVC or, some of the new PEX plumbing, things like that. I would certainly have on the schedule. Certainly list the address of each location if there's multiple, say for parsonage or a rec building across the street, whatever the situation might be. So that kind of basic information is very helpful in being able to.
And if in any of the buildings, maybe a column that would say, does this building have security monitoring? And
Yes, absolutely.
and on this building, does this building have fire prevention system, suppression, water sprinkler?
Yeah, like maybe when's the last time the
Fire
fire
hydrant,
extinguishers
sprinkler
were
systems.
updated?
Yeah.
Yeah. This could be a really good exercise, really, for the whatever your grounds committee or team is, to go and review each one of the facilities, to take a deep dive and looking at it and seeing, are there some things you really need to address? You start walking through the property, you see every one of the wall outlets has got just 2 slots, and there's missing that third, that ground. Well, maybe it's time to upgrade those. If you go into the attic and you see that you've got wiring that's covered in cloth, time to upgrade that. Especially if it's just naked, right? You see a lot more of that down in South Louisiana here. The different things like the plumbing. You see that there's galvanized or also clay plumbing in place. Maybe it's time to replace some of that. Obviously, you can't do all of it at one time, but incrementally, maybe start making those upgrades, because those are all things that insurance companies are going to be looking at.
It's interesting that over the course of time, some of these deferred maintenance costs actually end up costing more on insurance cost over the course of time, not immediately, over the course of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so being intentional about the stewardship of that. So Robert, one of the things I'm going to take from that question as we we still have another 30 minutes. We still have a lot of questions, folks. So I'm just want to give you all this, but I'm just making a mental note and sharing it with Robert that we're working to put together a landing page as a resource for our trustees on our website. And maybe one of the things we need to do is just set up a template spreadsheet as a resource for our churches to use that has those columns named, year, age of roof, age of plumbing, and so on and so forth. Just lay it out so that trustees just know exactly where to start. I think that's something that we could put together rather simply.
Yeah.
Um,
I worked with one of the local Wesley foundations earlier this year, and they actually had a really good table of kind of schedule of all their information. So we could. I'm sure they wouldn't mind if we were to borrow that.
Very good.
Or replicate it.
I'm going to take a left turn curveball moment. Just your advice as insurance agents about facility use agreements versus charter agreements with the Boy Scouts. And I'm going to give mine first as the future conference superintendent of the Trinity Conference, and then let the insurance guys talk. It would be our endorsement for you to have facility use agreements, not charter agreements with the Boy Scouts or other organizations of that ilk, other similar organizations. The liability changes between facility use agreements and charter agreements. So that would be our encouragement, but I'll let the insurance guys also weigh in. Jared?
Yeah, I agree with that too. The facility use a lot cleaner. I feel it's a little bit cleaner for them to shut liability off at a certain X point on it, to whereas if you had a charter, you kind of get, I think you get tied into it more. So I agree with you.
Yeah, I agree completely too. Same reasons. And just even expounding there, if you've got any sort of organization other than church members using your facility, there needs to be some sort of agreement in place that outlines who's liable for what, and hopefully also outlining what they're, where you also require proof that they've got insurance in place. So you're not picking up something that you never intended. to pick up.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with the two of them. And I speak not as only as an insurance agent, but as a scoutmaster for Boy Scouts. We're kind of in retired status now, but yeah, having that separation of liability, because under the old way of doing it, the church was basically absorbing the liability of the scouting program or whatever group it was, whatever organization. But having that facilities use, requiring the organization to carry their own insurance limits, is it's cleaner. It's a whole. It creates an extra layer of protection for the church.
So, question about deductibles and impact on insurance coverage. So, uh, what impact would a church's ability to have a large deductible play into whether or not coverage is able to be written, the premium, so on and so forth? And is that a game that can be played as far as shifting deductibles throughout the schedule, or does it need to be universal? Start walking through with us how you approach deductibles as an agent in working with the church in consideration of those factors.
Yeah, right now I'm going to encourage you to have a larger deductible. And when I say larger, probably, depending on your church size, I'm going to probably encourage you to have 5, 10, maybe $25,000 property deductibles. You can change, you can select the different deductibles for different sorts of coverages scheduled versus your actual property, your building property, or other things like that. But I'm going to encourage you to do that for a couple of things. One, and it's going to help save you premium, cost on your insurance. And then the second is really right now in the market, it's best if you don't file those smaller claims. And when I'm saying smaller, I'm talking 5, 10, maybe $25,000 claims. That it's better to absorb that cost by the church if you can do so, because in the long run, it's just going to be less expensive for you and also help safeguard your insurability with a more preferred carrier.
I agree with that. I think smaller deductibles are going to be a thing of the past. Anyway, I don't think you'll see 1,000, 2,500 much anymore. A lot of our companies are pushing us to go to the 5, the 10, the 25, like you said, depending on the value of the church, where they're at with it. But yeah, if you can pay the smaller claims as a church, the better off you'll be in the long run. It's just going to cost you more down the road, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
talk
I
about that.
approach it from a couple different, a little bit different twist. I mean, in Texas, for the most part, we don't see necessarily a dollar amount for a deductible. We see more percentage based on your coverage limit. And what I've seen, I'm a degreed engineer, so maybe I just overanalyze it sometimes, but I'll look at multiple deductible options, and what I typically see is there'll be kind of a break point where going up above a certain level, you're not going to get as big a cost savings. It'll be just very small incremental level. So, what can the church afford? From an emergency fund, we'll kind of use that FPU term. But what does the church have on hand for an emergency fund versus to take care of those smaller items like Beaux was talking about, versus what can they afford out of their operating budget for the premium? So there's always going to be kind of a break point there, or a tipping point. So our job is to help a church figure out what that is.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, great point. And, part of our job also is whenever you come to us and say, hey, this is something that happened, we will help guide you should you turn this in or not. Right. Because there's some claims that are just going to weigh heavier against you than others. Case in point would be you have you lose a few shingles and you get water inside. It's not going to be looked at nearly as hard as you have somebody that leaves a candle on and it causes a small fire.
That's That might have been counterintuitive for some of us, but that's helpful information.
Understand.
Yeah.
Kind of puts candlelight service on Christmas Eve in a little bit different perspective.
Yes, be very careful. It's a very pretty
Yes.
service, but yeah, be very careful.
They make the battery powered candles now, so
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. Okay. We don't worship a God of fake light. We worship a God.
He said it was the true light, not the true LED, right?
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so we've begun kind of getting into this conversation about what can churches do to help reduce insurance costs, to help set a course of action. Maybe I'm going to go ahead and answer like number one, and I hope that y'all will be okay that I did this. I really think that the first thing, if you're getting hit with a huge increase or you're getting hit with a disconnect notice, then the first thing to do is to call an agent. Whether you call one of these three or someone else, you need a professional to represent you to engage in that marketplace. At the conference, we've considered all sorts of things as far as how can we help our churches in this. One of the things we considered was, do you like pull together as a consortium of some sort? But the reality is, we can't ask churches in Arkansas to pay for a church in Houma, Louisiana's hurricane risk. That's not fair to those churches, and so we're not going to develop that. That's not appropriate for us to do as a conference. However, we can equip you with some contacts and some resources and an understanding that just because you've always, you might have been with Church Mutual and you had that agent's phone number and you've been with them for a long time. And so you thought your relationship was with that particular company and that contact at that company, and now you feel lost. Well, you could call an agent and have them engage in this conversation with you to check with multiple companies. You might even find multiple companies separate for your property insurance versus your liability insurance and be able to get some better pricing. So I'm going to encourage you as step one to collaborate and enter into conversation with an agent, an insurance agent that can represent you in that way. But after they talk to you as an agent, what are some things that you're going to tell them with regard to their next steps? In addition to the ones you've already given.
In addition, yeah, one of them is I think we're going to try to guide them through having an open mind of reviewing the different coverages that are there they've had in the past, and then also that we're going to recommend now, so that we'll also talk with them about their budget. What can their budget afford? And then be willing to figure out ways that we can maybe tailor back the coverage to fit maybe their budget. That's one of the things that we'll do. The other thing is that we will be able to review maybe the product, the location, and maybe point out some things that are potential issues. That's another thing that we do, because we do this every day, so we know what the carriers or the insurance companies are going to be looking for, and what are the red flags or the yellow flags or whatever else.
Yeah, I would agree. Our job is to help kind of prioritize that coverage wish list. Ultimately, with unlimited resources for churches, you just load it up and okay, we're totally protected and let's go. But that's not reality. So a lot of the conference might say, okay, what do we have to boil down? Just let's keep the property insurance. Just because that opens up just a whole different can of worms. If we don't you don't maintain that coverage, but from the liability perspective, what's really needed there? What can you potentially self-insure around? What makes sense from the directors and officers standpoint? The 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 abuse and neglect type coverages, for the children, the pastoral liability, cyber, we started talking about all these things. Okay, well, some of that may not be necessary, may not pertain. So we can kind of cut back on that, look at the deductibles, what makes sense. What aspect of the church building can we kind of put more into a self-insured basket than to have it covered under an insurance policy?
Yeah, great points Robert made. And this may be a great time for you to start implementing policies and procedures centered around, the conduct with children and just general grounds maintenance, just general membership. Just all the different policies and procedures that have been mentioned in different segments of this conversation. This may be a great time to really put those things into place as a way of risk managing, where maybe you just don't have the funds for the insurance product, or maybe as big of limits, or maybe to shift to where you have a higher deductible in those areas where you self-insure that a little bit more.
So I'm hearing a lot around getting clear on the affordability of deductible risk. Like, what can the church afford with regard to deductible, and get a clear understanding of that. I'm also hearing intentional maintenance and addressing deferred maintenance. And I'm also hearing establishing strong policies. The policy development is key. If you were to and if you want to like give summary bullets on any more, feel free to add. But one of the questions I have is that someone's asked is, what is priority 1, 2, and 3? And I know that the answer is all of the above, but
No, it depends.
oh, it depends. Oh, help us out, coach us up, because I was going to say give us
what haven't they done? What haven't they done? So then the next one's the priority, right? I don't know. I don't know that you can just say there's a 1, 2, or 3. I mean, what do you two guys think?
I'm with you. I don't. It's tough to prioritize. I think it comes down to the church's budget, what they can afford, and what we feel as professionals is most important for their coverage. I don't know that you can specifically give a generalized 1, 2, and 3, because each church is different. So I think they just have to sit down and go over it with an agent and go from there and see what they can help them look at.
Yeah, I would say priority 1 is maybe engage a risk advisor.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily someone who's going to sell you a policy, because there's companies out there that's their goal in life is to sell you policies. But that's one of the commitments that we make as Ramsey Trusted Pros, is we're not going to necessarily, the first objective, not to sell. It's going to make sure that they have the right coverage, and the right protection to act as a risk advisor. So that would be what I'd call priority 1. And then, from there, kind of what are the risk mitigation strategies that are in place already? And the great thing about it, neither of these two cost any money to a church.
Right.
Right. So it's time, not necessarily dollars, but what's the risk mitigation? So the way I like to describe it is the claims experience that Beau and Jared have kind of referenced. That's all looking at the rearview mirror. That's stuff that's happened in the past. You can't change that, but knowing those risks that may or may not have occurred to a church, how can we develop a strategy looking forward, looking out the front window of the vehicle rather than the rearview mirror? What are we looking for? What are we protecting against? And developing those strategies and policies, procedures, or things around that of, okay, how can we make sure that a claim doesn't occur in the future around this aspect of it? And like I said, those are 1 and 2 that aren't going to, you're not going to have a capital campaign to afford those.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you for that. So by the way, Jared had to go to his son's basketball game. So
yeah,
I hope it was church league basketball. I'm just saying.
Yeah, one of the I want to hinge off of something Robert was saying is, all 3 of us are Ramsey Trusted Pros, and part of that process of us getting approved of that is that they're looking for agents that are going to teach them, that are going to educate you about your coverage from the heart of a teacher, where we want to make sure you understand what you're buying, and we're going to try to teach you and educate you. And, a good insurance professional should do that with you and help you to understand really, what are the things you need to focus on? What are the things you need to pay attention to? And then what are the things that we can kind of help you mitigate that don't cost any money, and then put the attention in the right places. We are risk managers, not people that just sell you an insurance policy. There are agents out there, that's all they do is just sell you a policy. But if you contact your agent and all they do is just spit you, they say, what do you got now? They spit you back a number back out. That's not a risk manager. A risk manager is going to have a person is going to have a conversation with you, understand you and your congregation and your church and your needs, and then give you some options and make you understand what it is you're actually buying and what your options are.
Yeah. So that's really helpful. One thing we haven't talked about yet just came up in the chat or in the Q&A, and this is an urgency. And it actually skipped every other question and went right to the top for me. We have not talked about the vulnerability of having a lapse in coverage. And we have churches that got those 40% rate increases and said, we're going to roll the dice this year because we just couldn't afford it. We've talked about that in pre-meetings. I'd love for y'all to talk about that vulnerability, to talk about why that can prove a detrimental decision, not just the risk, but for future insurability. And then if you could talk about other options, we talked about ACV, you could explain that. We talked about E&S markets, you could talk about that, but just frame up, hey, if you're weighing out, have no coverage or have a reconstructed or reframed coverage, how do you approach that and why?
Yeah, you go ahead first, Robert.
I'll just give a real life case. So this was about a year ago. Susan was on one of the clergy only Facebook pages and came across somebody talking about Church Mutual dropping their policy, and she posted up, "Hey, give my husband a call." So the pastor, it's a small church up in the Fort Worth area. Pastor reached out to me and kind of got into that conversation. Well, come to find out, literally the day before he reached out to me, their policy lapsed. So it could be 12 hours, it could be 12 months. From an insurance carrier perspective, it doesn't really matter. You had a lapse in coverage, but their specific situation, they had a claim. Actually, they had filed 3 claims. Only one of them got paid out over the last 5 years, and so we went looking for coverage. All the standard carriers, the normal kind of name brand companies, because of the lapse, wouldn't touch it. They said, nope, sorry, you have to show that you have 12 months worth of coverage in place before we'll take a look at it again. So what I did was look, and Jason, you referenced the E&S markets. Excess and surplus is what that stands for. It's a good $5 insurance word. But it's other carriers that are not your name brand, but they're still good companies. And one that I like to reference, Lloyd's of London. They're not a standard normal carrier. They are a surplus lines carrier. But everybody knows them. Huge worldwide insurance carrier. We were able to find a carrier like that, not quite as big as Lloyd's, but we were able to find them an option, got some basic coverages put back into place. It didn't have the full gamut that they'd had before, but it was what they could afford. So we at least got that property coverage going again. And now we're about to come up on their 1-year renewal. In fact, I just earlier today got renewal notification on that specific policy. So it's in that kind of in that time, that season of the policy term, where now, okay, what are our options now that we've maintained 12 months of coverage? How can we transition to a more standardized carrier and see what the market's going to look like going forward for them? So it just gives us other options.
Yeah, a lot of the companies, what they look at when they see a lapse, right or wrong, is they're looking at 2 things. One of them is they have this period of time now where they don't have a trackable history, because insurance companies that you're with, you can ask them for loss runs where they'll show you what happened during that policy period, and then they can look at those times to see whether they had any claims or not. Like he mentioned, there was 3 claims, 2 of them not paid, 1 paid. Well, still, that's all activity that the insurance company is going to be looking at. If they don't have a period of coverage, but then they also can't go and look at what happened during that time as far as insurance claim activity. The other is sometimes they view that as you're just not taking care of your business, so to speak. Doing your due diligence, somehow that was a ball dropped or something like that. They may be looking at that in that fashion also, but it definitely makes it much more difficult when you do have a lapse to get better coverage. You can get coverage. It's just your options are going to be, lessened.
Yeah, so I want to kind of reframe this and make a connection. So we've talked about self-insurance, but I don't think we've talked about it prior to this conversation, prior to this last question, with regard to canceling, having no insurance, company relationship, and self-insuring everything. So talk to us about what is how do you frame up self-insurance in a value add or in a way that can actually be of assistance with regard to the coverage that you could get, the premiums you can get, the company that you could enter into a relationship with?
Yeah, I don't know. I have not bridged that with a carrier, but if you just don't pay you just don't buy additional insurance, that's not really self-insurance. Self-insurance is really more where you got a program in place, policy procedures of how you handle a claim, and then you've got a fund in place that will take care that you pull from for those claims. That's really what that is. I would certainly think you could probably present that to an insurance company if you're looking to them to show, look, here's the policy procedures. This is where we have had some claims. We pulled from that, but also where we've been putting money back in. They're not going to look at that as well as they would if you actually had insurance in place that can look at claims history. But with the E&S market, they may would look at that a little bit more favorable.
So in our earlier questions, when you were talking about self-insurance, I just want to get clear on this. When you were talking about self-insurance,
Sure.
you were talking about having a designated fund for facility maintenance or repair that would be able to cover items that you might be able to take a claim out on, but you know that it's a smaller number. The benefit is going to not live up to the cost. So the cost benefit analysis is, let's pay this $6,000 claim, even though we could get $1,000 because we have a $5,000 deductible. That $1,000 wasn't worth it. Let's pay this out. So that's a way that you could kind of handle some of those of your own claims so that you prevent future increases of premiums or uninsurability.
Well, I guess let me say 2 things. What I was just talking about a second ago, I was talking about you totally self-insuring everything is an option you can take. Sometimes people just don't buy insurance and they refer to it as self-insured, and that's really not. Now, what I was alluding to earlier was choosing a higher deductible, keeping a fund that's what you pay your small claims from that you could have filed on insurance, but you don't. So self-insuring maybe $25,000 worth of any sort of property losses that you would have. I would think of maybe in that fashion.
Got it.
Maybe
Got
it's
it.
just a part of your building fund or a claim fund or whatever you want to call it. But that's a lot
Yeah.
more obtainable for a lot of churches than just self-insuring everything.
Yeah, self-insurance is a very broad term. And kind of what Bo is describing is a specific use of that term. Large corporations, global corporations, they may self-insure, but it's more from a liability perspective, not so much from a property perspective. And where they'll just have cash reserves on the side to handle any, years ago, I worked for a company where our auto insurance, they self-insured. So they actually, there was an agreement that they had, where they covered the majority of it, and an insurance company only took 10% of the risk or something. I can't remember. That was about 30 years ago when I worked for these folks, but that's one aspect of it. When we're dealing with churches with limited resources, limited budgets, that typically they're not going to fall into that unless it's maybe one of the mega churches, but we don't see that very often. But
no,
then,
we don't see it a lot.
To Beau's point, maybe raising deductibles to for the church to kind of insure, saying, because insurance, all that is who's going to manage the risk, or who's going to handle the risk? Is it going to be an insurance company? You're going to pay a premium to buy that level of, say, hey, I'm going to pass this risk to you, but I'm going to pay you X number of dollars to do it. Or do I just keep it in house? So you kind of keep from the property insurance perspective, to keep things manageable. Okay, what's that break point of what manageable means for each individual independent congregation? Where, okay, we're going to have the insurance company handle the catastrophic stuff and the day-to-day, pipe break, leak in the roof, that kind of thing. Okay, we're going to handle that in with our emergency fund in the church. We're not going to, it's, catastrophic is more church burn down type thing. But
yeah, I'll give you an example. A church that had to self-insure part of it, it just, was this kind of like the option they really kind of needed to chase. Was a client that I have, they've got it's a fairly good sized church. They've got around about 14 million in total building and contents value, pretty good size. They have $1 million actually in cash reserves. But they also had several claims in the last few years, claims history. So it became very difficult to get insurance. The lowest deductible option I could get a carrier to offer to them was $100,000. Well, they just had to self-insure that first $100,000. And, what they did was, okay, well, the cost went up, but we will go ahead and in our budget set aside these funds to pay claims from if that happens. Obviously, that all churches don't fit into that. They're, that's a pretty good sized church. They got a lot of cash reserves. Most churches, unfortunately, don't have that sort of cash reserve. But that is a scenario where you may have to self-insure it to a certain point.
So one more question, and then I'm going to draw us towards a close. A question from another new church that's considering development. Is there any value to engaging with the insurance agent prior to beginning construction to seek advice?
Yes.
And yeah, I thought I
Go
knew.
ahead.
And they said, is that even something the insurance agent would do?
Yes,
And
please.
We would love to.
Yeah. Talk before we get too far down
Yes,
that.
100%. Yeah.
Well,
if you're like planning a renovation or planning on adding some sort of new ministry, talk to us first. Talk in the early stages of when you first start planning it, talk to us so we can give you some guidance. Help you maybe to understand how it's going to impact your church financially from your insurance standpoint. But we may have a wealth of knowledge. Robert's talked about several different options with some of the carriers that he has. That I have two that offer education that may really help facilitate with the proper policy procedures and just centered around different ministry opportunities that you have. So so please, yes.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, even upgrades of the church kitchen.
Yes.
And buying a new oven. What is the insurance impact going to be on that? We were part of our with our new church plant. We visited another non-denominational church that the architect that we're using, they built that church also, or they designed that church. And now they're coming back because they designed in this space for this kitchen, but all they have is a microwave oven and a refrigerator in there because they didn't have the resources to fully build out the kitchen. Well, now they're having to take that on, and they what is full food service going to do to their insurance coverage rather than just hey, we're gonna offer donuts in the morning. Now we're gonna have, made to order omelets and lattes and the whole nine yards. Okay, that changes things a lot. So let's be involved in that conversation, just so it's not a sticker shock item on the back end. It was like, okay, if we could have done A, B, and C rather than X, Y, Z, then your premium would have been a whole lot different.
Man, I tell you, Shipley's Donuts, come on, just let it go. That works. That
It,
works.
Yeah.
pretty much. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
but
And
I'm
also
I'm
it's
sure
just
there's some churches in East Texas that aren't close to a Shipley's.
Yeah.
right.
Well, I
Yeah, we
mean,
don't have
that's
one here. Yeah, we don't have
oh,
one
that's
here.
sad, Bo. That's sad.
That's
But
all
I'm
right. We
sure
got
It's
a
you
a
have
really good
Houston
place though.
institution.
yeah, I'm sure
Yeah.
you have a good donut shop somewhere up there. But guys, I'm so grateful. Robert, Bo, grateful for your time, grateful for your insight and all that attended. I'm grateful for your questions because it helped to really frame up our conversation, and I hope that it was helpful and healthy. I want you all to know that this webinar will end up being posted on our channels, and ultimately, we are working on having a landing page on the website that will be available for a resource. I've been taking some notes about some things that we could help. A spreadsheet to help track facility improvements and those sorts of things. Also, I got a question about a sample facility use agreement. Then actually we have with us a member from the denomination's finance administration pension and benefit committee. They're working on one of those. So I was really excited to hear that. We'll be gathering these resources together, platforming them so that our churches are well equipped to engage in this conversation. But I want to just end with this before I close in prayer. I do hope that you will utilize these resources, insurance agents that are Dave Ramsey Trusted Pros. Really thankful for their time. But if you don't use them, I hope that you will talk to an insurance agent before you take drastic measures after you get one of those sticker shock moments or a disconnect notice, because I feel like those moments of vulnerability, the decisions we make can have long-lasting ramifications that we don't have clarity on from a layman perspective. And I'm speaking of those of us outside of the insurance business. So I hope that you'll reach out and use these resources to help bless your churches and the stewardship of those resources. So again, thank
And
you
and
both.
Jason,
Yeah,
even a second opinion.
yeah,
Right.
absolutely, absolutely. So I'm going to close this in prayer and just offer blessing over these folks. Lord, we thank you. We thank you for this evening, for all that we learned. It's like going back to school and realizing there is so much that I don't understand and so much that I don't know goes into these factors in this the development of these policies. And so, Lord, I thank you for wisdom that we received, and I pray blessing upon these agencies and these agents. And I ask, Lord, that you would help us as your servants to be faithful stewards of the resources you've entrusted to us, including the facilities and the leaders. Lord, we're thankful. We're thankful for what it means to be a part of this great movement, the Global Methodist Church. And Lord, we pray that you would be glorified in all things so that the world would know that Jesus Christ is Lord and that we would experience his grace and love to the uttermost. All for your glory, honor, and praise. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.